Welcome, Mental Growth Network. This is Yi Meandr, digital health expert and community leader of Mental Growth Network. In this series of podcasts, we discuss different topics around healthcare, around mental health care and corporate culture and startup culture. And we invite amazing guests to us to share their knowledge, to share their experience. And today we invited Mahmoud Assy, and he is a DEI consultant who works with corporate culture on how to build inclusive and just environments and processes. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you as well. And to start from, our topic today is the mental impact of exclusion. So we will discuss inclusivity, yes, and exclusivity. And here, especially, I would highlight the exclusivity part because mostly we're interested in topics around mental health. And there are some important things that people underestimate when talking about inclusivity and exclusivity, especially when we talk about productivity and mental health for their employees. So to start from, Mahmoud, if you can present yourself a bit and tell us how are you connected to this topic?
Perfect. As you said, my name is Mahmoud. I'm originally from Egypt. I live in Spain. I live in Madrid. And I've been working as a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant for the past 5 years or so. And I've started this work actually based on personal experience, firsthand experience. I've had the privilege in my life to be part of many underrepresented groups, which helped me basically understand how systemic exclusion happens in different systems. I also lived in different countries in the world, which allowed me to see how we design those systems, and sometimes the design does not allow for minorities and underrepresented groups to be in the decision-making tables, or sometimes these systems exclude people from the system completely. That sounds right. So this is why I decided to to dedicate my professional life to helping change agents, people that are in organizations, understand how they can exercise that change and employ that work of inclusion and foster better environments for everyone.
Thank you. And to start our discussion, how do you define exclusion in the workplace? And what makes it hard to detect?
So I think that my preferred way of explaining exclusion is to focus on the idea of design. If I tell anybody to design, let's say a mobile phone, for example, right? What probably they'll do is that they'll think of a specific user. They think, how would they do something, right? But a lot of the times in that first thought, in that imaginary user that we have in mind, we're not being very inclusive. We don't think about a wide diversity of people that might use the phone. So what that leads to is that we create a system. If we look at bigger structures like an organization, we create an organization that is focused on a very specific or a number of very specific profiles, and everybody else it either has to exert a lot of effort in order to adapt to that system or be able to enter that system, right? So exclusion is when at the core, we create structures that don't have a variety of profiles and lived experiences and identities in their core design. So the work of inclusion would be how to reshape that design.
So you can say that there are some specific profiles which we can say that is exclusive and non-exclusive, yes, inside the company, but same time there are some specific like set of skills or set of, I don't know, mindset, which is okay. So for me, the first question after your description comes, but how do you define it? Because, for example, being myself as an entrepreneur, I already think about I would like my team to be like that. And I don't want my team to be any kind, because it will be chaos. How will I control it? Where we will go? So how do you define which means inclusive and exclusive, and what means just a normal way of, like, I don't know, management and focus?
Let's take the example that you just shared. So I want to create a team. I want a team that has a specific set of skills, so they're able to do a specific set of things. Up until here, it's fine. But what happens next is people start to define how they think these skills might be acquired. So for example, I might look for a person with a specific degree, or a person with specific years of experience, or a person. I start to shape the factors, build the requirements, for example, when it comes to hiring, of how I think people would acquire those skills that I need for the job. Here is where a lot of exclusion happens, because I'm already shaping that profile. And a lot of the time is based on my experience and the people that I've seen in my environment, right? So I start to look for people that are similar to me, whether consciously or subconsciously in that sense, right? But I don't explore the question of what are the multiple ways that a person can acquire the skill to do this, right? And this is very important for us to look at, because even like if we think about where I'm going to publish my job, right? Like I'm thinking, okay, I have an opening. I'm looking for a specific set of skills. I've defined the requirements, and I'm gonna post a job. Most people, for example, would go to, or a lot of people will go to LinkedIn, for example. They're gonna post a job on LinkedIn. But then we need to ask, why did I choose LinkedIn? A lot of the time it's because of my specific experience. Maybe I found jobs before there. Maybe I posted jobs before there. Maybe I've seen other people post jobs there. Maybe I'm simply a user of LinkedIn, and I think that it is that platform to post jobs. But the question is that platform the most, or the only platform to post jobs? Is it the only way to reach potential candidates? Would posting a job there ensure that I reach a wide variety of candidates, or would it limit it to a very specific profile, depending on the people that follow me, depending on a lot of things on the platform? Are there other means? Like, did I contemplate, for example, maybe sharing this job opening with other organizations that are working on labor inclusion or work inclusion of different groups? Like, for example, organization working with transgender individuals and helping them enter into the workforce, right? So, did I contemplate the wider variety of possibility, or did I look at one specific possibility and not questioning if it's the only possibility?
Yeah, sounds interesting. Like opening the box, yes, and thinking out of the box, yes, developing your creative mindset.
Yeah.
But our focus today will be not so much maybe in the way of like people who only starting looking for teams, but more on the employees itself, how they feel them, where they work in inclusive or in exclusive environment. And here I want to ask you, in your experience, how does a lack of belonging affect mental health outcomes?
So we can build on what I shared so far. So basically, so if I am entering a system that is not designed for me from the beginning, I'm going to be exercising a lot of effort in order to adapt myself, to shape myself to fit within that specific system. So that with that, we can see within multiple groups. There is a sociologist called Irving Goffman who coined the term called covering. And covering basically is this effort that we exercise to push a certain part of our identity into the background, for it not to be the first thing that we see. He uses the example of President Roosevelt, and how whenever he would step out to his cabinet, he would make sure there's a table in front of him. And it's not that people didn't know that he was in a wheelchair, but he didn't want people to see the wheelchair first before seeing him, right? So covering is not more about hiding. It's about basically making a certain part of identity less pronounced, trying to push it more into the background. And in Deloitte in 2013, they did a study in different organizations. The study was focused on the US, but it's very interesting because what they found is that, for example, when you're talking about lesbians, gays, and bisexuals, we see that 83% cover at work. 83% try to hide a part of their identity at work, right? But even if we look at white straight men, we see that 45% cover at work. And this is very interesting because when we enter a system and we feel that we cannot be who we are, we start to try to always tone down a certain element of our identity. And this already has a huge impact on ourselves. Here in Spain, for example, there are multiple studies that show that around 43, 45%, I don't remember the number exactly, of members of the LGBTQ plus community go back into the closet when they enter the workforce or in the workplace. And the reason for this again is that if I feel that me being myself in this space is going to affect my access to opportunity, is going to affect my possibility of getting promoted, or it's going to affect my well-being in the organization, I start exerting a lot of effort into this. And this experience is already taking out a lot of energy from people. And this is not limited to the LGBTQ plus community. We can see it also, for example, with African women or Black women, for example, where there's this notion, for example, that, for example, wearing your natural hair is not seen as professional, or seeking to, for example, straighten your hair in order to look more to do this act of covering, really, to make a certain aspect of our identity be pushed back to the background. We can see that also in modes of speech, what type of language is accepted or mode of speech is accepted at work or not. So there are a lot of aspects that we can see that exclusion, has a huge impact on people because they're already all the time thinking about how am I presenting myself. And beyond that, when you are different and you enter a system that is not designed for you, you're probably going to have different ideas from other members in the organization because you come from a different lived experience, we come from a different background, et cetera, et cetera. And then we face the challenge of whether the organization would be willing to change with the diversity that it's gaining, with these new members that are entering the organization. I think this is also where a lot of the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion of the organization fails, where the organization wants diverse people to enter the organization, but does not want to change with the diversity that is entering the organization, doesn't want to challenge the ideas that are happening, it doesn't want to think differently about stuff. We usually want diversity, and when we want innovation, new ideas. For example, I want to create the best marketing campaign or the best sales campaign. Let me find the most different new ideas there. But when it comes to the modes of processes or how we're doing stuff, we usually want the way that we've been always doing things. And we see this, for example, with generational diversity a lot, where younger members in organizations, a lot of the times when they're sharing ideas, they're not heard, or they're told, well, you need more experience, as if their ideas themselves are not valid, So it's we want the younger generations to enter, but we don't want them to shape or reshape the organization. So I think this is also one of the things that when you don't feel heard affects your well-being. And I know I'm talking too much, but the last thing is also how people are reacting to difference, how people are equipped to understand how to interact with difference. And one of the major things that we face a lot at work is also microaggressions, which are these micro messages that are sent to people through different acts, how am I interacting with people? A lot of the times there are things that we're not very aware of. They can be simple comments, can be things that we think are harmless jokes about certain identities or about certain things. And it can be, for example, who am I asking their opinions in meetings, who's talking, who's not talking, even who I always tell to turn on the AC or turn it off as opposed to other people, all of these acts send different messages. And microaggressions is one of the leading factors that leads a lot of underrepresented groups to leave organizations because it accumulates. It's a small thing, but then it happens every single day. And then with time, you break and you decide that it's not the place for you.
Here, interesting to think about this idea of what is the corporate culture then? Because I suppose that there are specific frameworks which were designed by evolution that, for example, at home you can highlight more this type of yourself. In your friends circle, you're highlighting another part of yourself. If you're close, intimate relationship, third thing, and then work is fourth thing. And so it's not like every person is different, but same time we have some kind of a culture. So, for example, if everyone is working, yes, you should not start shout and speak very loudly because it can kind of distract people. So I suppose some ideas, for example, like school uniform and similar things, are designed to help people to focus. And isn't this idea a bit kind of like controversial because you say about bringing diversity, bringing more cultures, but again, where is the balance between that?
So I think the point of culture is very, very, very important to talk about because the concept of culture fit is used so much excuse exclusion. I've talked with so many organizations that use the criteria of culture fit as a factor in their hiring, right? But then you ask members of those organizations, and I've done that in the past, what is the culture? And you find a wide variety of responses. It's not something that is very well defined. So basically, it is a word that what it's hiding is affinity bias. Affinity bias is basically the bias of me seeking or be feeling more close to or feeling more inclined to people that look like me, people that act and talk like me, right? Um, and this is very problematic because from the beginning, I am filtering down to a very specific group of people and not allowing access to a wider group of people. Now, going beyond this, we can obviously define culture in a way of creating elements that are fundamental for the organization. But this is an action that should be worked for us to define and ask ourselves with every element that we add, is it truly essential for our work? Is it truly, is it creating a barrier or is it creating a platform for us to be able, as you said earlier, to work better together, right? To make us focus better, to create more harmony? Or is it an element actually of exclusion where we are actually not accessing different pools of talent because we have this limitation, or we're only looking at this as opposed to looking at the whole possibility of opportunity that exists out there and talent that exists out there. So I don't think it's about necessarily I think it's about shifting, not necessarily about balance, it's about shifting what we mean when we talk about culture in first place and being able to use critical thinking when we're talking about these elements. Because they're not simply slogans. They're not simply things that we put on our internal communications and external communications. These are things that lead to specific, to not hiring people, to not promoting certain types of people, et cetera, et cetera. And they can be, again, very limiting. And the organization can be should think about this a lot because I've been in organizations where, for example, they would feel hesitant about letting a transgender employee have a client-facing job because they're afraid of how that might affect their relationship with the client. But then we need to ask ourselves as an organization, first of all, why do we have this fear? What is the representation and the picture that we want to transmit to our clients and other members? And what does it truly mean for us to implement inclusion in our mode of work? And I think that this is essential for us again to discuss. And I feel like organizations do not discuss this enough. If they just limit it to a simple words that people interpret in a wide variety of ways, and then everybody is employing it the way they think it should be employed, right? And a lot of the times, our fears, in my experience, a lot of the times our fears are bigger than what it actually exists in reality. Sometimes we exclude because we're afraid that something bad is going to happen, but usually our act of exclusion is worse than what might have happened had we actually done the work.
Imagine you are, I don't know, founder of really big company, and can you share your dream? What can be the culture of the like, from your perspective as an inclusivity, yes, DEI consultant? What can it looks like? What people feel? What is their, I don't know, condition? Can you share this kind of vision? It will be interesting to hear.
So I think for me, there would be a lot of elements that for me are important. I think for me, I would love to create first of all, a flexible and autonomous culture, which means is that I want to create a culture that focuses on the well-being of employees through adapting to the specific realities that they have, providing them with different flexibility, specifically when it comes to uh, their schedules, for example, so that they're able to adapt to their specific needs, or for example, when it comes to their mode of work, would they prefer to work remotely, would they prefer to be in an office, et cetera, so that they're able to adapt according to their needs. If they're, for example, caregivers, if they are neurodivergent, if there are people with disabilities or something else, they're able to interact with work responsibly. And when I say autonomous, is that I want people to feel empowered to lead their work, to feel that they are responsible, taking responsibility for their work, to not feel micromanaged, but to feel that the space provides them with a platform where they learn new skills, where they can explore new horizons, where they can make mistakes as well. So creating this psychological safety environment in that sense. And I think for me as well, it's something that is very, very important is access to opportunity. I say specifically access to opportunities because I want to create a culture of equitable and just access to opportunity, meaning that we are looking at who is getting access to opportunity, who's not getting access to opportunities, what factors are leading into this, and responding to those different factors. So for example, if I'm noticing that it's basically that I'm seeing that more men are getting more promotions than women, I need to understand why is this happening? Is this because of bias, that people are more biased towards men and hence they're promoting them more than women? Is this related to maybe in the specific context, we need more capacity building programs to be implemented? Do we need more networking? Yeah, we need more people to be more connected in the organization. So I'm focusing a lot on the aspect of access from a systemic perspective allows us to not just be reactive situations, but also proactives in the structures that we create. And I think I would like to build also a culture of inclusive leadership in a sense of leadership that is a lot more horizontal than hierarchical, in the sense of understanding leadership as that we look or we seek a person a lot of the times when in different situations, depending on the context, when we perceive that person to have a unique voice or an interesting voice or interesting thing to say in a specific context. I think at the end of the day, what I want to lead at is that all the aspects that we talk about, if we think about them only on an individual level, we're not truly implementing them in an organization. Each word needs to be reflected in a specific system, process that is truly implemented there. Otherwise, they're simply slogans or just a marketing campaign. So if you say any word in your culture that is not translated into a specific action, specific series of actions, specific processes, specific systems, then it's just marketing and it's false marketing.
Let's talk about this a little bit deeply. How can you define that this environment is inclusive and this is not inclusive? For example, I'm a team lead and I want to know the feeling in my team, or I'm a corporate leader. Yes. So, well, which type of metrics help me to define these things?
So I think there are different types of things that we can look at. So I think we can divide them into two different sets. So we can talk about result metrics and process metrics. So when we're talking about results metrics, basically, we're talking about who is getting access to. So who is getting access to, for example, opportunities? Who is getting access to benefits? Who is getting access to, for example, if I have a well-being program or access to, for example, psychologists, who's getting access to that and who's not, right? So who's actually using these assets? So who's getting access to, and then disaggregating this data by identity. So I'm looking at how is a certain group accessing the opportunities versus another. etc. And we can duplicate this a lot. Who's getting access to training? Who's getting access to, I don't know, like, international opportunities? Who's getting access to mentorship? The list can go on. So who gets access to, and we segregate it by data. So this already is very important for us to do, because this already shows us, it's a very good indicator of bias, of potential bias, right? Because we're seeing how the result of these tiny decisions that we make in different locations in the system lead to a specific result. So we're looking at the results and we're seeing the difference between this. And I think this is important to highlight here, because a lot of the time we think about bias, again, very individually. But the work of DEI should be very systemic, in the sense that we should look at the entire system, and we should see how these individual things lead to systemic impact. The other element is process metrics. Now, process metrics basically is me looking at the different actions and processes that lead to the results that I have found, right? So for example, I can look at the hiring process. I can see, okay, so I create a job description. The job description is revised by one person, and then that person publishes it on LinkedIn, for example, and then blah, blah, blah. So I go through the entire process. And then I ask myself, this process that I have, how many inclusive practices does it actually implement? What are these inclusive practices that they implement? Does it check, for example, as we've mentioned earlier, with their requirements? Does it check that the requirements contemplate a wide variety of profiles? Does it have the job description reviewed by a diversity of people instead of just one perspective? Does the candidates themselves, are they reviewed by just if it's people from the similar profile, or is this a wider diversity of profile that is implemented? How are people evaluated? Are we using, for example, it's very common to use these tools that, these games to kind of, evaluate the cognitive abilities of different people that are applying, different candidates that are applying for a job. We should ask ourselves, is this very inclusive? Would a person, for example, who's neurodivergent or a senior employee or et cetera, if people member different groups, would they be able to showcase their skills through that tool, or is this tool creating what we call adverse impact, which is basically generating exclusion through creating a form of evaluation that is not inclusive at its core, in that sense, or already excludes a certain type of people. So we start looking at all these different processes that we have and ask ourselves, is this inclusive at its core as a practice in itself, right? Again, with LinkedIn, where am I posting my job? Am I posting it in a wide variety of places to ensure a wide variety of candidates in only one place? And that's it. So we should look, I think, at both results metrics and process metrics.
And if we talk about exclusion, I would like you to talk about the effects of it, because yes, we kind of already giving people a solution. We're talking about a lot of how can we, define it. Yeah, we speak briefly that, for example, can be enough creative solution, or maybe the talent can be missed. Yes, but is there any more outcomes? For example, can exclusive environment bring trauma? Can environment can be the result of trauma? For example, maybe one of the founders have specific psychological trauma, and that's why he creates exclusive environment. He doesn't even know that. So can you please tell more about this exclusivity, cause and effects?
Well, I think it definitely can be the result of trauma and can definitely cause trauma. Let me start with the second one first. So it can definitely cause trauma because when you're building, again, a structure where it's not designed for a specific, for a wide variety of profiles, and let's say a certain profile, different profile enters the organization, like a person from a different background or identity, etc. What might happen there is that the system does not know how to react to this. So I've worked, for example, with organizations before where they are trying, for example, like you would see that the organization is trying to be a bit more inclusive. For example, they hire a person with disability, right? But that person with disability needed a specific type of flexibility, like, for example, having a specific time of day where they need to do something or something like that. So they need to do a certain edit to their schedule. What happens is that other members of the organization start to say, but why do you offer this to that person? Why are they not doing like the same shift that I'm doing, et cetera, et cetera. And what that led is to a conflict where specific demeaning comments have been said to the person with disability. So what happened there? I think this is very important for us to think about this, that when we're talking about creating inclusion in an organization, we're talking about two different things. We're talking about culture and we're talking about structure and culture. So what happened in this organization is that they tried to implement structure, but they still needed to work on culture. They need to help generate a better understanding of why these things are important, why equity and not equality, right? And I think this is important because why not offer the same thing to everyone, which is equality, versus offer depending on the need of the person. Why is this important to generate a better work environment for everyone? So this can cause trauma because if we don't balance these two areas of work, structure and culture, we generate a space where such harmful comments can happen, right? Or it can be the other way around. I'm newly married, for example, to a person from the same sex. Like say I'm getting married to a man. And then let's say, for example, in the company doesn't contemplate the possibility for me as well to get vacation days, for example, like same as heterosexual couples. Or I'm adopting a child and maybe the company in this policy doesn't contemplate the possibility of having some time off in comparison to, for example, people that just had a baby, for example, stuff like that. So like there are different areas of as well where the structure itself might not contemplate the wide variety of possibilities and realities that could exist. Right? And both of this can generate a sense of trauma or a sense of exclusion or a sense of not belonging to the space. Again, it's a sense of the space is not designed for a person like me. And this idea is very important for us to contemplate. If the space I'm in is not designed for a person like me, I can easily get to, I don't want to continue being in that place. I don't want to continue contributing to the growth of that place because it's not designed for a person like me. Right? So belonging is very important for us to understand in order to generate this culture. And then on the other side, I think trauma on the that can lead to creating exclusion is very important because again, when we're talking about organizations, even though they're big structures, we need to remember that they are structures that are happening by design. So if I usually build based on my own biases, based on what I'm seeing, what I've lived, what I think works, what I think doesn't work, et cetera, including my trauma, right? And this can lead me to exercise different actions of exclusion that maybe for me, from my perspective, aren't even perceived as acts of exclusion that lead to a very specific again, profile or people that are in this organization. So it's kind of trauma can lead to exclusion as well in that sense, right? So, trauma and biases and stereotypes, et cetera, et cetera. But again, because of the picture of, or the element of design and how we build all of them.
Yeah, just recently I was meeting my friend, and he told me the story of his work. He worked in hotel and hospitality business, where his senior manager says about some of employees like, so good employee except he's gay. Like it's his problem. He will never grow in this company. And then my friend said, "Is it okay that I'm also gay?" He said, like he didn't know what to say because he didn't. Like he said, "Oh, but you doesn't look like a gay." He said, "Yes, but I am." And after this comment, I can't continue working in your company because this means that you have this attitude, and it will be later on me. Yeah, so you just now
Yeah,
closed our relationship with this comment. For my friend, it was very serious because he felt that it's something he can't handle. Yes, so this type of exclusivity, yes, is for him was a barrier to continue. Even they have a good relationship, and before the senior manager liked him so much, and he kind of wanted to push him to go up, but then they have this small conversation, like 1 minute talk, and then it destroyed all the thing, all the relationship. And this is
yeah,
also, effect of exclusivity culture.
yeah.
Um, let's talk about peer support. Is there any way how can peer support or employee-led initiatives reduce exclusion-related harm?
Yes, most definitely. I think it's very important for us to think about this. When we're talking about society, we usually look a lot at we seek community. And specifically, we see community also when we want to exercise a movement, when we want to create change in society, right? Like we go to a specific, we build a community, or we go to a community to find networks, to find people that feel like us, to find people that that support us, and to find allies that understand us and want to understand us and want to support us in our work. And I think organizations, specifically like the transformation that needs to happen in many organizations, should be inspired a lot by social movements, in the sense of putting a lot of emphasis on building momentum, building connections, building community, right? On one hand, for the person who is from a minority group or an underrepresented group, they feel that the weight does not fall on them to respond to all and every situation. Right. So I'm, for example, a member of the LGBT plus community. So if I'm in an organization, I don't want to feel that I'm the only person to respond to any discriminatory act happening to the community, or I don't want to feel that all the weight of inclusion and teaching falls on me. So what I can do is I can build a network of people like me in the organization, or people that want to ally or want to understand this reality and are learning about this reality, and we're building these connections. And building these connections, again, lifts the weights, but also expands the dialogue to different areas of the organization, as opposed to it being just, in a specific, in people, for example, in my direct circle. I'm expanding this, these conversations to other areas of the organization. And this in turn helps make people not feel alone, right? And it also helps react to certain situations. Like I mentioned, for example, the example of the person with disability at work and the comment that they received. Imagine that there was another person in that conversation that responded in the moment, that said, like, for example, engage in a conversation with the person right then and there, and rejected this act of exclusion, this comment that was shot at the person with disability. So if this had happened, maybe the person wouldn't have felt that this place is not for them, because there was a counter act. There was another person that said no. The example that you said, for example, there, imagine there was another person in that conversation, and maybe that wasn't a member of the LGBT plus community, and reacted in the moment. Maybe that reaction would have made your friend, for example, not feel that the entire organization is like this, and maybe it would have counteracted the manager. Maybe they would have made them rethink as well about things, etc., etc. I think this is important. Also, something that is very important is that movements build movements, in the sense of the more you ally yourself, the more you build these connections, the more importance the change they want to exercise becomes for the organization, because there are more and more people that are allying with you. And something that we see a lot that I see a lot in organizations is that we focus so much energy on people that are opposed, like on the complete opposite to what we want to achieve. Like that, they don't want to work on inclusion, they're very against it, etc. But what we see in organizations that there are a lot of people on the fence. People that are like not for, not against, they're just like want to do their work, and that's it. And you gain these people the more you build connections, the more you build dialogue, the more you build community, the more you engage with them on community work. And in psychology, it's very interesting as well, because one of the major things that make people support causes, specifically people that are on the fence, is inviting them to support, for example, in doing a specific action. Let's say I'm doing an event and I invite people to just help set it up, putting the chairs, blah, blah, blah. It gives people this curiosity of this cause, like what is it about, and engages them a bit more, right, in a more indirect way in that sense. And I've had conversations with people, for example, that have built employee resource groups, these who take communities within the organization. And it was interesting because they told me that at the beginning, it was difficult. They couldn't find people. But then 2 years later, they have now 300 employees in that group, whether members of the of their specific community or allies of the community in that sense. And now, after having 300 employees, they're starting to be able to convince the company as a whole to even give them resources to do events, to do trainings, to do stuff, right? So it's all about building movements. And I think by thinking of it as a movement, as a community building process, as opposed to simply reactive or me alone fighting this giant in that sense, it becomes less burdensome. It becomes more enjoyable even. It becomes you don't feel alone. You feel that there is an entire group of people that are surrounding you, that are supporting you and are aiming for the same thing, a better work environment for everyone.
Yes, this is very deep and this is very related to what we are doing here in Mental Growth Network, because it's a basic idea what we want, yes, that we want to unite people who feel that it's important to talk about mental health and develop it, not only in the way to feel healthy, but also in understanding the roots of mental health. Because the more, for example, the more I do podcasts, the more I see that how many things interface and interact with our mental health. For example, last podcast was about workspace. We not really imagine how much the workspace affect you, the colors, the geometry form, the people around, how you structure it, how you think about the mindset of your employee. That employee, maybe it's not only the person who can sit nearby the laptop all the day, yes, but this person is a human being, and humans have specific evolution, biology, and they need some specific rules of environment just to feel themselves healthy, and that many of the workspaces that were created in 20th century, they just outdated. Human brain doesn't work like that. Body doesn't work like that. And your employees feel tired, and employees change the work every 2, 3 years. It's normal thing nowadays. And a lot of this connected to many things you underestimate. And from other point, I quite understand that financially it's very hard to maintain organization, especially big one. Yes, and you need really to push all the deadlines, all the processes. But at the same time, it's always, a question of harmony, and everyone, I think, understand that you overdo something, then it will break. Yeah, and inclusivity, exclusivity is also one of these questions that maybe some people think, oh, we have so much problems that we even should bother about this one. Like we have already like marketing problems and sales problems and this and that and that and that. And then at the end of this list, maybe some companies can think about inclusivity. But at the same time, maybe while our corporate culture and business culture in general develops, we should see that business is created by people and people have their own mental health. And this mental health is a science-based subject, and you can have metrics to understand how it affects you. Even not talking about exclusivity and inclusivity, I have some friends who work in corporates and they afraid even to talk about deadlines because they feel burnout. They feel that they need to stay sometimes at work 3 hours more than they should be. And I say, but can you express this to your team lead, to your manager, just to brought up this question that something happened in the workflow that every time I have this problem. And he say, no, I can't. They will like fire me from my organization. And I say, but why do you think so that we will fire you? Did you have like very experience that you tell about overworking and they fire you? She said, no. I said, but where did you get that idea? And yeah. So I really agree with you that very many things are not spoken that should spoke about.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you said, except for one thing is that I think one of the major problems with topics of well-being, of diversity, equity, and inclusion, etc., is that we usually see them as an extra, as opposed to something core to everything that we're doing. And this is, I think, is the shift that we need because like it has a major effect on organizations in general. We know that working on this it leads to better innovation. There are studies, for example, by Deloitte that show working on flexibility, diversity, and inclusion leads to 83% more innovation in an organization versus an organization that will work on these elements. We know that it even leads to more profit, like working for having an ethnically diverse executive team. We know that according to McKinsey, leads to about 39% more profit in comparison to companies that don't have ethnic diversity there. The same number happens as well with gender equality in executive teams. So there are so many different studies that show that this is quite beneficial. But we also need to understand that this is also a responsibility that we're doing, because if we think about work as a right, if we think about in well-being as well as a right that we should have in our lives, we need to understand that this should be something that is accessible to everyone, because otherwise it's only a privilege that only a few access, right? And if we want to build just societies, just workspaces, we need to ensure that these opportunities are accessible for all. And the good news is that doing this work leads to very specific, tangible, profitable benefits. Right? Like there are very clear benefits to doing this work. So if we continue to think about it as something that is separate, not something that is integrated in how we do marketing, how we do hiring, how we do sales, how we do everything in the organization, how we do promotion, etc. If we don't think about it as core to every single process that we're doing, we're not going to be implementing it, because DEI is not something that HR is doing or the diversity department is doing, but it's something that everybody in the organization should be doing. Because the idea itself is just make sure that the systems and processes and the environments that you're creating are truly just and inclusive, are truly integrate the ideas of justice, of equity, of inclusion within them. And this already opens the door to so much, like even as simply as sales. If I think of a wider diversity of clientele, for example, I start selling to a wider market. You know, we see that, for example, with makeup companies, cosmetic companies. You know, they start selling mostly for white women, for example, but then they're like, oh, wait, we can also, you know, expand to, you know, other ethnicities. We can also expand to the LGBTQ plus community. We can also expand to et cetera, you know, like the more we implement diversity, equity, inclusion, the work that you're doing, there is a lot of benefit that you gain. It's not less, right? So, and again, it is a responsibility that we all have.
I would like to ask you a few more questions. What frameworks do you use when advising teams on inclusive culture repair?
I think that, again, like we need to think about culture in a very systemic way. The sense of if there is a slogan that is not connected to a process, it is just false marketing. So I think we need to, first of all, analyze what is our culture? What is truly our culture? What is our culture in practice? What are we doing? So we can, again, look at the systems that we have. Again, we can look about results metrics, we can look at process metrics, and we can truly extract from this what exactly is happening. We can do surveys, internal surveys, and analyze how people are feeling in our work environment, for example. We can and disaggregate the data by identity, for example. We can create focus groups and analyze and discuss with people what's going on, what challenges are they facing. We can create, if we don't have, we can create employee resource groups of different communities and engage them in the creation of a culture that works for everyone in that sense. So we need to think of culture again as something that is practical. It's not just ideas. It's not just an aspiration. Culture is what created by the different interactions and processes that we're creating in a system. So to rectify culture, we need to have systemic action. We need to understand system truly how it works, who's entering, who's accessing, who's not accessing, et cetera, and change it actively and proactively with the people that we want to include. And I think this is something I want to highlight so much. To transform a culture to be inclusive, you need to work with the people that you want to include. I think for certain groups, this is obvious, and other groups it's less obvious for some reason. Like, for example, when it comes to gender equality, if I tell you there is a feminist campaign that doesn't have a single woman in it, you tell me, like, what's that? That doesn't work, right? But then we see a lot of campaigns for the LGBTQ plus community, for racialized individuals, for the people with disability, for neurodivergent individuals that don't include people from those groups in every single step of the process. A lot of the time, they're just consulted at certain areas and that's it. If we truly want to transform culture, to transform organizations, to build truly inclusive and just spaces and processes and systems, we need to build with people.
Thank you. Very inspiring. Last question is the interconnection between DEI and mental health. I don't know how deep you are in mental health, but I suppose you are always somehow connected if you're working in this field. And my question is from your experience, maybe even personal attitude, I don't know. What can we learn from the mental health field that DEI still needs to apply?
So I think like I thought about a lot about this question and trying to figure out like what could be interesting here to add. And I think like for example, DI we're still dealing with a lot of things on a very individual level, right? Like we're still talking about inclusion as if it's just individual biases that people have and not a system that is completely structured that leads to a specific outcome, right? Whilst in well-being, I see there is a bit of movement to think about also benefits, about a bit of think about burnout, about structure, workload, et cetera, et cetera. There is a little bit more engagement with system. I think both of them still need, specific in the work environment, need to even be more systemic, to think more proactively, to truly understand the structures, and again to think that structure and culture usually are connected in that sense. And we need to think about both and not just work with one or the other, right? And I think like this is also something that is interesting. I feel like DI sometimes focus too much on like writing a policy or doing something that is structural. Maybe some cultural aspect, doing an event, for example, or a specific training, but is not fully balanced, right? And I feel like on the other side, I feel sometimes well-being focuses more on culture and touches on structure. And I think I'm questioning if there is enough focus implemented by corporations to truly build sufficient structures, and specifically diverse structures, in the sense of thinking about a wider diversity of profiles and what specific well-being structures they need. Thinking about, for example, caregivers, thinking about neurodivergent people with disabilities, et cetera, and their access to different benefits, different opportunities, flexibility, different, stuff like that. But I think both elements at the end of the day overlap in a lot of things, because when you're working on well-being, we're improving the sense of belonging of people. But I think like at the end of the day, there is a lot of overlap between both of these areas.
Yes, and mental health, what is it interesting that it can also show neuroscience and science-based physiological response. For example, when we talk about belonging is very important, yes, because it reduces stress. When you reduce stress, you have specific reaction in your body, your hormones react specifically way. Yes, your energy becomes uplifted. And how much does it cost? Yes, if you feel in your organization just more safe, if your employees learn to be more human and to lead communication with more respect, yes, with more to feel more justice between each other, yes, and this related to mental health. Yes, maybe mental health thinks about it more scientifically and in terms of like some small process. But in general, yes, I think the word culture is very good explaining that, because at the end of the day, culture is something directly affecting your mental health all the time. And your inner culture, yes, how you communicate with yourself, and your culture, how you communicate with others, and the cultures, how others communicate with you, and the cultures where you and these others, in which system, yes, ecosystem you're all. And these all levels, yes, at the end affect your mental health and your hormonal state, yes, and your chronic stress level, which can cause a lot of disease, yes. And I know it from different research that nowadays the mental health is something that people even don't want to talk about, because it's becoming so much widespread, the problems of mental health. And why is it happening? A lot of people can relate this on how we work and how we interact with people, because we're really not trained in the way to do it mental health positively. And I think that inclusivity is one of these topics that we should understand that it's related to it. Yes, if you feel inclusive, exclusive, how do you react to that? Yes, what can you do in this? Are you limited? Can you like talk about it? Can you brought this pain out? Can you discuss this pain with whom? How can discuss it? All these frameworks, yes, I would say the frameworks of communication, they should be more and more developed. And this is kind of our mission as people who do projects, as people who work in corporates, yes, to share these ideas because it's something just normally. I think it's process of evolution of understanding how to feel more happy, yes, as a social entity. And this was our podcast about the inclusivity and exclusivity. Yes, the mental impact of exclusion. I hope you enjoyed us. And very much thank you, Mahmoud Assy. Yes, it was a pleasure to meet you. I feel you very clear in your goals in life, yes, what you present. And thank you so much that you covering these topics. And you are really right that this something is core for us that we should not put on as an extra thing to talk about when I will have free time, because as we know, free time never appears. Yes, we need to talk about it now. Yes, we need to consider this because if we feel something is uncomfortable, we should work with it right now, or at least in some close time, because otherwise it leads to some negative effects that we don't want to have.
Thank you so much for this very interesting conversation.
And this was our Mental Growth Network podcast. Please like, subscribe. If you have any questions, you can put your comments below. And see you soon. Bye bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Mental Growth Network, where we explore mental health in a tech-driven world. Like, comment, and subscribe for more future-forward conversations.